Before we begin today, I may as well talk about what you're all thinking. You're wondering what this thing on my arm is, probably. If not, it's a sling. You may be wondering where it came from. The truth of the matter is that I finally got tired of Pastor Jesse's jokes, and so I started training him to take him on in his wrestling ring, and it didn't start out so well. No, I'm just kidding. I played a lot of baseball when I was a kid, and I played a lot of softball as an adult. And just over the years, I started tearing in my shoulder just a little bit. So I've been seeing a physical therapist for the last few months, and they decided I needed surgery. And so I just had a slight little surgery to repair a small tear in my labrum. And my reward is this and a not insignificant amount of pain medication. Which is also to say that I wrote this week's sermon on not an insignificant amount of pain medication. And I will be preaching this week's sermon on not an insignificant amount of pain medication. And so if you are a visitor today, I hope you give me another chance. I'm not always this way. You can be the judge as to whether or not that's good or bad. I don't have any idea. But I'm glad you're here today, and thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to do the best I can. I got told by at least one board member after the first service that I should preach more sermons on drugs. And I'm still processing what to do with that. So if you've got any wisdom, I'm more than willing to hear it. So. I want to talk just a little bit about a plane crash in 1999, if I can. A Boeing 747 went down outside of London, and there were some immediate red flags that were raised to cause people to wonder what's going on. You see, Boeing wasn't causing plane crashes. Everyone flies Boeing. Every airline flies a Boeing plane. But there was a particular spike in crashes for Korean airlines. Now, that's really strange because airlines don't build planes. Airlines buy planes, and they staff planes, and they schedule planes. And so, typically, one would think that when planes are crashing, you think mechanical. But identical planes weren't struggling. It was this airline that was having a significant step up in crashes. And so they began to wonder, why did this plane crash in 1999 right outside of London 1 minute after it took off? 1 minute. What is going on there? And so they started looking at the records of this flight. Who was in it? Who was flying? What was going on? What was the circumstance? What was the discussion like in the cockpit? Why is Korean Air crashing planes? Is Korean Air dangerous? And so as they began to research, they came upon something really interesting that they had never considered before. The pilots that day were two gentlemen, one named Park Do-kyu, I think. He was 57 years old, a former South Korean Air Force pilot, highly trained, very, very solid pilot. His co-pilot was Yoon Ki-sik, 33 years old, 20-some years younger than him, also very well trained. It didn't seem as if they were ill-equipped for a flight this day. And yet, here they were, 1 minute outside of their takeoff, they had crashed. Why? What is going on? Well, they began to watch the flight story, and what they learned was that the co-pilot saw the gauge in between them about whether or not they were balanced or banking. The co-pilot in his 30s noticed this, but didn't say anything to the pilot. And the pilot began banking further, turning, just after taking off, much more so than they were supposed to. And the co-pilot still said nothing. The pilot that day, 57 years old, took off angry. He was mad. You may wonder why he was mad. Because they were late. That was it. He was near unapproachable because he was mad because the plane had taken off late. But more so than just an angry tyrant who was mad about the schedule, there was a Korean dynamic that had never been considered before in pilots. You see, if this were two people from the Middle East or two people from the West or two people from South America, this problem may not have occurred. But there's a particular dynamic in Korean culture of respect and conversation from the ages. And so the 33-year-old co-pilot saw the gauge that the two of them both shared right between them, saw that the pilot was oversteering and overbanking, but did not feel empowered because of their cultural dynamic to tell the man older than him with a higher title than him that he was doing something wrong. Simple as that. Now, our culture is our culture, right? Their culture is their culture. And that is baked into their culture, a respect for elders that allows the elder to do what they're going to do without being disrespectful to the elder. This, of course, led to a plane crash, and it needed to get addressed. But it didn't occur to the co-pilot in terms of safety and danger at the time. He was thinking in terms of age and respect, because that's how he was programmed to think. That's how he was programmed to interact by his social upbringing. And so pilots, in a lot of ways, have had to be retrained over the last 20 years because a lot of crashes have occurred because of social hierarchy issues that were never thought about before. Plane crashes have happened, in fact, between, say, Colombian or South American pilots not being able to communicate properly with American air traffic control because of dynamics in cultures that are missing in just a basic conversation where faces can't be seen and cultures can't be understood. There wasn't a unique language for pilots in air traffic control that they all shared. They brought their own culture and their own language to the table and would often struggle to understand how forceful or how not forceful one or the other was because of the culture they brought to the situation. Very interesting stuff. Malcolm Gladwell talks about a lot about this. If you ever read any of his stuff, there's a chapter in his book, Outliers, about this stuff. It's all really interesting. And the reason I bring this up, this cultural difference, this language that's shared or unshared, is because sometimes I think we come to talking about Jesus in a very similar sort of way. We have come to an assumption in the church that most everyone has heard about Jesus by now. They either like Jesus or they don't. We're not real sure what to say as a witness to the world anymore. What can we say that hasn't already been said? Is the world at arm's length from the church and doesn't want to hear from us anymore? How do we bridge that gap? What kind of language do we use? How do we change their mind? There's a lot of entrenchment in culture and conversation that has happened between the world and the church. And I feel like the church may just be at a place where we're not real sure what our role, our vocabulary, our culture, our problem solving, our conversation looks like from here. What do we do from here to tell the world the good news of Jesus Christ when much of the world may have determined and decided that we don't have any good news to share at all? What do we do? What do we say? Where do we go from here? At Crossroads, we're talking about our church mission and our church vision this month. And you've seen this logo over my shoulder a lot. It was played in the video today. You're going to hear about it more and more because we want this to be a centering idea around which we make decisions and operate here at Crossroads. But the first one we're going to talk about today is really the pillar, the foundation of who we are. It's where we begin. It's what we want to do. And we want to be a place and a people where we help people discover Jesus. We want people to discover Jesus. And this language is a little bit, it's chosen with some reason, right? We could have said we want people to find Jesus, right? But if we said that we wanted people to find Jesus, it implies a little bit that you've got to go looking for Jesus. That Jesus is somewhere, maybe hiding behind a curtain or stuffed in a closet, and if you find him, then you can have him. But this language of discover Jesus was chosen for reasons, because we believe that Jesus is coming after us before we even realize it. That Jesus loves us and yearns for us and wants to be in a relationship before we ever say yes. And so this language of discover Jesus is very, very purposeful, because long before you choose to follow Jesus, Jesus has chosen to pursue you. And so this is very, very purposeful language, this idea of discovering Jesus. But in order to discover Jesus, we need to be a place that is promoting Jesus, that's speaking about Jesus. And so the way we're strategizing to do this is by prioritizing vibrant worship and by being a trusted presence in Greater Baltimore. These are the ways in which we plan to embody in order to show, to testify that Jesus is Lord. If you join us on a Sunday morning, our hope and our prayer is that you have experienced a vibrant worship where people are centering themselves around an experience with Jesus. And then our outward testimony to the city as well is that we are trustworthy, and that in our trustworthiness, they see that we are sent by our connection to Jesus. This is all important to build this trust again, I think. Some of the way I think about it is a little bit like I'm afraid that we're wrestling with the idea of polio in our society today. Interestingly enough, my dad, born in 1951, had a big mark, a circle about this big on his arm from his polio vaccine that he had as a child. I was always struck by this particular shot that he took, because I was always given needles for vaccines, very, very small needles. My dad looked like he had been shot by some kind of sci-fi gun. And so I would always look at that and see the very, very particular marks, and he would say that it was his polio vaccine that he took as a kid. When he was a child growing up in Connecticut, not far outside of New York City, kids he knew had polio. Just one generation before his birth, the President of the United States was in a wheelchair because he had polio. Polio was considered a clear and present threat and danger, and most everyone knew someone or knew someone who had polio in the early to mid-century in the United States of America. Now, I've never met anyone with polio. I'm not even entirely clear on what polio is. I just know that I don't want it. But this is what happens with issues of vaccination, right? When you get to the point that you clear out a disease, you sort of move on to the newest threat that's in front of you, and you get worked up and concerned about that new threat. But now, because we're a few generations away from anyone having polio, there are people in our society that don't see polio as a threat anymore, are unconcerned by it. And there is an occasional outbreak of something that we thought had been cured in different places in our world today, because we move our head off of the target, right? So when polio is taking kids' lives, everyone is concerned about polio, but when it becomes a thing of the past and we don't know anyone who has it, we become a little less concerned about it. To some degree, I worry that the Christian faith is a little bit like this as well. We've become satiated. We've become wealthier in our society. We've become freer in our society. And so the sort of things that we used to talk about Christianity saving us from, in some ways, we believe we have the power to save ourselves from. If we work hard enough, if we get wealthy enough, if we get good enough health insurance, if we make enough money, if we have enough friends, if we have enough people of the opposite sex and become good-looking enough, right? We can provide ourselves a life that feels like a salvation in and of itself. And so the sort of religion, the sort of experience that our grandparents and our great-grandparents used to gather themselves around, the sort of prayers that they would pray that God would break in and feed them tomorrow because they don't know that they have enough food for then, or that God would send enough money for a bill that they can't afford to pay but they need to, or that God would save them from some sort of disease that they had no imagination for a cure for. In so many ways now, we're removed enough from that old world that we see ourselves so often as our own salvation. If we work hard enough, if we save enough, if we hustle more, if we take better care of ourselves, we will achieve all of the things that once upon a time our forefathers ascribed to Jesus. And so, like polio, something that we thought was saved a long time ago, I wonder if we even know what it is that we're asking Jesus to save us from and save us to. Is what Jesus is selling something that we're in the market to purchase? This is a question that we should come face to face with, because the things that Jesus used to sell sometimes don't seem to be something that our society is interested in buying anymore. Being saved from sin used to have very tangible consequences and salvations. And now our society, let's be honest, seems more and more flagrant and interested in touting its sin than it ever has before. And sin becomes increasingly alluring, and conversations about whether or not we need saved from it seem to be rising to the top all the more and more. But let's take a step back from that for just one moment if we can. As much as we're saying or seem to be believing that sin is no longer a problem, that we could be our own salvation, that we could work ourselves ahead, that we could pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, that there are ways to take care of ourselves, as much as the world is getting better in each and every one of those ways, ask yourself this: is the world really okay? We like to believe that we are racing towards a utopian society, working towards a better future, that every era is better than the era before. Every generation has more advantages than the generation before. These are the stories we tell ourselves, that we are on our way to nirvana of some sort. And yet, our world is a disaster. We have more than we've ever imagined that we could possibly have. We have an ability to acquire more. We have an ability to earn more. We have an ability to make more. We have an ability to live longer. We have an ability to make ourselves more beautiful. We have an ability to make ourselves more healthy. All of these things have been given to us, and yet angst, depression, anger, war are all at what seem like all-time highs. And that's just simply if you turn on the news and you watch and see what's happening in our cities here in the country and what's happening in war zones across the world. Before that, you could just walk down your neighborhood, go to your workplace, and try just the simple task of asking people how they're doing. Very rarely, if my hypothesis is correct, will you get a quick response that says, "I'm great." If you ask people how they're doing, most often you get this sort of curated telling of how things aren't okay, but I'm not sure how much I'm supposed to tell you right now. How are you doing? I'm busy. Hey, how are you doing? I'm okay. Hey, how's it going? The weekend's coming. These sort of ways of answering are masking the fact that even on a local level, we are struggling. We're struggling with busyness and tiredness. We're struggling with fatigue. We're struggling with overextendedness. We're struggling with a fundamental lack of peace within us. We have been given all of the gifts that this world has ever been able to give, and yet there is an unrest and a struggle that is thick in the midst of the world that we live in. We have achieved the salvation that our society offers in its fullness. We've been liberated economically. We've been liberated politically. We've been liberated sexually. And people are struggling. It has not gotten better. There's not a freedom or a joy on the other end of that has permeated and taken hold of our society. We have achieved everything we thought we wanted, and we're not getting better. We might actually be getting worse. And so today, I'm going to read some words from Jesus to you. Specifically, what it is that Jesus says that he offers. This is his gift to us. And I'm going to be honest with you before I read it. I read it and I think, ooh, that sounds good. But I'm not real sure how Jesus is going to get this done. Because it sounds too good to be true. How in the world could Jesus possibly be offering these things that it seems that so few people actually have? They're intangible things. Oh, but are they things that we yearn for? And so Jesus today in Matthew chapter 11 is going to remind us again what he's all about. What it is he's offering, what it is he's selling, what his project of salvation is, the gift that he yearns to give to us. And as I read it today, I ask you to think to yourself, does this sound good? Does this sound like the life you're yearning for? Does this sound like the turn and gift that you wish you could receive? We're going to read Matthew chapter 11, verses 25 through 30, and I'm going to invite you, if you would, to stand with me as we honor the reading of the word of the Lord today. At that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you are pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. I want to give you rest for your weary souls. I know many of us today would testify to being weak, burdened, tired, busy, worn down. We're hustling at the pace of the world in order to achieve and unlock a salvation that the world is promising to us that's on the other side of one more dollar, one more promotion, one more hustle. And we swear if we could just get there, then we would be satisfied, then we would be filled, then we would reach the heaven that our society is promising. And yet we don't know anyone who's reached that heaven. The truth of the matter is that our friends, our neighbors, our families are tired, worn out, overwhelmed, afraid, depressed, anxious, hurting, struggling. We're doing things at the pace of the world to achieve all that this world could possibly offer for us. And Jesus is saying, that's not why I created you. You're created for something much different. And so when the world says hustle more, work harder, earn more, be more prestigious, have better cars, have nicer houses, Jesus is saying, that's not salvation. Salvation looks like the weary being given rest. Salvation looks like humility and gentleness from one who has a right to authority and power. See, the interesting things about Christians today is one of the reasons I think we're really struggling in this cultural moment is that we're so easily assimilating to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, which leads to God becoming marginalized in our own lives, which then leads to a deteriorating relationship with God, which then leads to Christians becoming even more vulnerable to secular assumptions about how to live, which leads us to even more conformity to the culture of busyness, hurry, and overload. And that cycle just keeps continuing. We're purchasing hook, line, and sinker the gospel of busyness, hurry, and overload when Jesus is saying that in him life looks like setting weariness behind, finding rest, and learning that his heart is humble and that he'll take our burdens from us. I wonder if these things of busyness, hurry, and overload are not amoral things like we think they are. I wonder if Jesus is offering us rest, a light yoke. I wonder if the opposite of that is sin. And I wonder if our assimilation into a culture that's telling us to hustle more, work harder, look busy, look accomplished, is actually turning us from the purpose that Christ has called us to. And the thing about it is that if I'm honest and I take just one step back, I don't want the world that I'm giving myself to on a week-to-week basis. I don't want to be busier. I don't want to be more stressed. I don't want to be more anxious and depressed. I want to find rest. I want to find trust. I want to find calm. And Jesus is saying sometimes you've got to set the world aside to accept the gifts that I give you. And the gifts that Jesus is promising here, they're truly the gifts that I want. That's what I want. I don't want to be busier. I don't want to seem more ahead. I don't want to seem like I'm hustling and rushing and working hard. And yet it's all too easy to find myself in that pattern. And the more I find myself in that pattern, the harder it is to hear God's voice. The harder it is to find rhythms of church and devotion and prayer. Jesus is calling us to a better way. He wants to help us in the midst of our life. His project is to find us in the midst of our work, our mission, our life, and to help us, not to burden us with more. And so often we hear this gospel of Jesus and we think, oh, that's just one more hard thing I have to do. But Jesus presents himself as a helper, as a carer. I saw this short video online this week that I love that just it's a metaphor for me of how God comes alongside of us when we are at our worst, our mess, when we fall over, and how God helps and picks us up. Check out this short video. This is the project of salvation. Not to shame us when we're down like the Jesus we've heard about, but to see that when we fall and we're stuck, to come and lift us up and help us out. We don't have to waste our energy on self-caring and getting ourselves out of our stuckness. Christ unsticks us and sets us free for the purpose for which we've been created. I came across an obituary this week. I'm going to read this obituary. Pretty much this is going to be the closing of what we do today. But I want you to hear the story of transformation in this and connect this to what Jesus wants to do in our lives. This is one person's story, but it's a story and an invitation for all of us. This obituary is funny. I think in the first service I told them it's an obituary, and so they kind of like put on their black veil and then uncomfortably giggled. This is meant to be funny, okay? So let's loosen up a little. Okay. Ken Fusen, born June 23rd, 1956, died January 3rd, 2020, in Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha of liver cirrhosis, and is stunned to learn that the world is somehow able to go on without him. Ken grew up in Granger and decided when he was a sophomore at Woodward Granger High School that he wanted to be a newspaper reporter. He covered sports for the Woodward Enterprise before leaving for the University of Missouri, Columbia. He attended the university's famous School of Journalism, which is a clever way of saying almost graduated but didn't. Facing a choice between covering a story for the Columbia Daily Tribune or taking his final exams, Ken went for the story. He never claimed to be smart, just committed. In 1981, Ken landed his dream job, working as a reporter for the Des Moines Register, where he was probably best known for writing a one-paragraph, one-sentence weather story that has been reprinted in 4 books. In 1996, Ken took the principled stand of leaving the Register because the Sun in Baltimore offered him more money. 3 years later, having blown most of that money at Pimlico Racetrack, he returned to the Register, where he remained until 2008. In his newspaper work, Ken won several national feature writing awards, including the Ernie Pyle Award, ASNE Distinguished Writing Award, National Headliner Award, Missouri Award twice, and Distinguished Writing Award for the Best of Gannett contest 5 times, but who's counting? No, he didn't win a Pulitzer Prize, but he's dead now, so get off his back. There are those who would suggest that becoming a freelance writer in the midst of the worst recession since the Great Depression was not a wise choice. But Ken was never one to be guided by wisdom. He wrote the book Heading for Home with Kent Stock about the 1991 Norway baseball team that won the state championship in its final season. Good copies are still available. In 2011, Ken accepted a job in the marketing department at Simpson College, where he remained until 2018. He enjoyed it very much, but once again forgot an important lesson. Always have a plan B. He was diagnosed with liver disease at the end of 2019, which is pretty ironic given how little he drank. Eat your fruits and vegetables, kids. He is survived by his sons, Jesse and Max, and his stepson, Jared Reese, who all brought Ken unsurpassed joy. He hopes they will forgive him for not making that point more often. He loved his boys and was and is extraordinarily proud to be their father. For most of his life, Ken suffered from a compulsive gambling addiction that nearly destroyed him. But his church friends and the loving people at Gamblers Anonymous never gave up on him. Ken last placed a bet in September 5th, 2009. He died clean. He hopes that anyone who needs help will seek it, which is hard, and accept it, which is even harder. Miracles abound. Ken's pastor says God can work miracles for you and through you. Skepticism may be cool, and far too many years Ken embraced that. But it was faith in Jesus Christ that transformed his life. That was the one thing he never regretted. It changed everything. For many years, Ken was a member of First United Methodist Church in Indianola and sang in the choir, which is a neat trick considering he can't read a note of music. The choir members will never know how much they helped him. He then joined Lutheran Church of Hope. If you want to know what God's love feels like, just walk in those doors. Seriously, right now, we'll wait. Ken's not going anywhere. Ken had many character flaws. If he still owes you money, he's sorry, sincerely. But he liked to think that he had a good sense of humor and a deep compassion for others. He prided himself in letting other drivers cut in line. He would give you the shirt off his back, even with the ever-present food stain. Thank goodness nobody ever asked. It wouldn't have been pretty. He was also a master jumble solver. Other survivors include his father, Don Fusen, brother Joe, a niece, and 2 nephews. In lieu of flowers, Ken asked that everyone wear black armbands and wail in public during a 1-year grieving period. If that doesn't work, how about donating a book to the public libraries of Granger or Indianola? Yes, this obituary is probably too long. Ken always wrote too long. God is good. Embrace every moment, even the bad ones. See you in heaven. Ken promises to let you cut in line. What a beautiful story that is. And God is yearning to make something beautiful out of our lives. He testifies here to the story of his life being cluttered by a gambling addiction. He was broken. He left his dream to chase money and lost it all in an addiction. And he found redemption in Jesus. Jesus brought his life back together and gave him hope and a purpose. And I don't know what it is that you're struggling with today. I don't know what you came with here today that doesn't feel so presentable or beautiful or good. I don't know what your barrier is, what your hurt is, what your history is. But Jesus is presenting himself as a gift given to you in a world where you're constantly asked to prove yourself. To say, no, you don't need to prove anything. I love you the way you are. I want to give you rest, restoration, hope, a future. I want to give you esteem where you have embarrassment. I want to give you wholeness where you feel broken. I want to give you life where everything feels like death. These gifts that Jesus gives are free, and they're meant for and they're marked for you. And so as the band is preparing to sing this final song, I'd just like to invite you to take a posture of prayer with me for just a moment. Close your eyes, bow your heads, and just survey yourself just a little bit. This is a non-threatening moment. No one's looking around. No one's spying on you. But I just want to invite you to testify to me today as your pastor that if you're not real sure that you're in the space that you yearn to be with Jesus, and you want to give that space back to Jesus, your life, your struggle, maybe it's an issue of sin, but you're yearning for Jesus to take hold in your life in a new way again. If that's you, I'd invite you just to show your hand to me and just tell me, Pastor, would you pray for me this week as I do that work? Amen. It's great to see a few hands, 5, 6, 7 hands around the sanctuary. 8, 9 people saying that they want more of Jesus. And I see you, and I want you to know that as your pastor, I love you. There's no shame in saying that we yearn for more of Jesus. And I'll be praying for you this week by name as I think of you, and I invite you to join me in praying as well. A prayer that Jesus will always answer is for more of Jesus. You pray, ask Jesus to fill you, to come and be with you and be your friend, to bring you salvation. He will always answer that prayer. And I'll be joining you with that prayer this week. We're going to sing a final song today, and I invite you can lift your heads now, stand with me. Let's sing this final song of rejoicing before we go today.